Story time about the guy who was obsessed with me. We're gonna call him Ryan. Well, Ryan had a crush on me for a long time. And one night, one of our friends asked me to go to a party with them. And Ryan was gonna be the DD. And everything was good. We were all having a great time at the party. Well, Ryan and I went off to one of the bathrooms. And we started making out. And while we're making out, he goes, "I really want to fuck you, but I can't." And I'm just like, "Why?" And he said it was because he couldn't get it up. And obviously he was embarrassed about it, which is understandable. So I left the bathroom and didn't plan on telling anybody about it. Until I walk over to a group of my guy friends, and they're telling me that apparently Ryan told everybody that we fucked. So at that point, I didn't give a fuck and I told them what actually happened. AKA that he couldn't get hard. And apparently he was mad at me after that, but I had no idea. So he said, "Do you still want me to take you home?" So I said, "Yeah." And now that he drove me home, he knew where I lived. And then I got a text from one of his friends, like for part 2. Part 2 about the guy who was obsessed with me. So like I said, as soon as I got dropped off, his friend Ella texted me. And she was like, "Oh, it was so wrong for you to say that he couldn't get it up," and a bunch of other nonsense. And I just brushed it off and I was like, whatever. So I went to sleep, and the next morning that I woke up, so my house had like a gate to get in and there were locks on it and all the locks were broke. And my stepdad also saw that he slashed my fucking tires. I ended up telling him everything that happened that night, and my stepdad's 32 and Ryan's 22. So they're only a 10-year difference. He basically gave me an option. He was like, either I can call the cops or I can go beat this kid's ass. I was like, okay, just call the cops. So we called the cops and they ended up catching him on the surveillance camera, like of him breaking the locks and slashing my tires and everything like that. So then they found him and arrested him. And let me get this straight. If he just wouldn't have lied about it, then it would have never came out that like he couldn't get it up. He just had to go and tell everybody that we fucked.
This story time is how I purposely got pregnant so my boyfriend wouldn't leave our relationship. Well, leave me. So, I've been with my boyfriend for 6 years and we started dating since we were both 19. When it came to the relationship, I was more so the breadwinner. I paid most of the dates and I was there for him emotionally. I would invest hundreds of dollars into his business ideas that failed, unfortunately. We even got an apartment, and at one point I was working, going to school, and paying for all of the bills, cooking, cleaning, and I never asked anything of him because I didn't want him to see me as a gold digger. And he would spend time playing video games and working on his rap music. It wasn't the best, but I believed in his dream. So I basically took care of him. A couple years later, his grandfather passed and left him $500,000 in his will. And at the time, he started to get really distant. He was using that money and never spent any on me. I expressed my concerns, and he said that he was done with the relationship. And from that moment, I lied and said I was pregnant. If you want to know what happened, this is part 2 of how I purposely got pregnant so my boyfriend wouldn't leave our relationship. So, like I said, he was given $500,000 from his grandpa's will and wanted to leave me. So I lied and said I was pregnant. Now, I wasn't upset that he wouldn't give me part of the money. I always had my own money, and quite frankly, most of it would go to him. I was just hurt because I sacrificed and invested so much into this man to prosper, and once he was financially stable, he wanted to leave me. Now, at this time, I wasn't physically pregnant. I lied. Now, when he found out, he stayed with me, and I stopped taking birth control. So, literally, within 3 weeks later, I got pregnant. And even though he was with me, he wasn't really with me. He really didn't come to none of the appointments and wouldn't check up on me. He became mean and started cheating on me. There's more to the story. Come back for part 3. This is part 3 of how I purposely got pregnant so my boyfriend wouldn't leave our relationship. So, like I said before, I got pregnant, and then he started to act really distant, and he cheated on me. He told me he wanted to leave the relationship multiple times, but then again, his actions showed different because he'd always come around and did things that people in relationships would do. And around this time, money started to get tight. I would ask him if he could pay for certain things, and he would refuse, and then started to say I was only with him for money. But what was crazy to me is that most of the relationship, he had nothing, and I was the one working. And still, when I was pregnant, I was the one working. And with the money he had got, he would buy himself nice clothes, got himself a car. And the girl he was cheating on me with, he bought her the most expensive clothes. And I wanted the relationship so bad that I allowed him to have side chicks. I never asked him questions, and he still never wanted me. A week before the baby's due date, he completely left me and went with the girl he was cheating on me with. If you want to know what I did after that, this is part 4 of how I purposely got pregnant so my boyfriend wouldn't leave our relationship. So a week before the baby's due date, he completely left me. I was devastated. I became depressed, suicidal. And because I was so stressed, the doctor said that I needed to calm down because my blood pressure started to get super high and that would be good for me or the baby. After the baby was born, he came around to see the baby. At some points, he tricked me into thinking we were getting back together. And once he had slept with me, he'd leave again and go back to the other girl. I tried to tell his new girlfriend about it, but she didn't believe me and called me crazy. I'd always see him make posts about her, spoil her, and everything. After 2 years, I got a therapist because I started to get anxiety attacks. And I found out I was codependent and I had abandonment issues due to my father not being there for me. And I was afraid of being alone and a man not truly loving me. And I allowed someone to treat me horrible because I didn't want to be alone. Regardless, no girl should have gone through what I did. All girls should love and put themselves first. This is part 2 of how my parents forced me to marry a 40-year-old man and I was 14. So we got married and a couple months into the relationship, he became abusive. Whenever my food tasted nasty or something wasn't clean right, he called me a lazy wife and told me I was no good and he should have married someone else. His 6-year-old son had no respect for me. The little boy scratched me, would yell at me, throw stuff at me, and my husband wouldn't do anything about it. I would tell him that I didn't like how his son was treating me, and he stood up and tells me to stay in my place and tells me I'm just a bad mother. I'd cried every night, wishing I could go back home to my mother and father. 2 years later, when I turned 16, I found out I was pregnant. He was so happy about it, and for once, he treated me so sweet. He would cook for me, clean, and told his son to be nice because his little brother was in there. When we found out the baby was a girl, he got mad and walked out on me. Part 3 will be up next. This is part 4 of how my parents forced me to marry a 40-year-old man and I was 14. My husband would always accuse me of cheating, but I found out he only accused me because he was cheating on me the entire time. Ended up finding out because his son told me. And like I said earlier, his son never liked me in the first place. So when I had made him upset, he randomly said, "That's why my dad has a new woman." I was off about it, so I went to ask my husband about it, and he admitted to it. He was very blunt about it, and he told me it was because the lady tempted him. I believed him at the time, but as time grew on, I started becoming very insecure. I'd do whatever he want, but it was never good enough because he still kept stepping out of our marriage. On my 19th birthday is when I realized I had to figure out a way for me and my daughter to leave him. He didn't even say happy birthday to me, and that was my husband. I had no money, I didn't own anything, but I took a chance, so I packed whatever I could, and I planned for me and my daughter to run away while he went to work. This is part 5 of how my parents forced me to marry a 40-year-old man and I was 14. So like I said before, I made a plan for me and my daughter to run away while he went to work. When he left, I packed up food, clothes, and took money that we saved up just in case something happened. I woke my daughter up out of her sleep and I told her we need to go. I woke her son up and I told him we were going to the store and that we would be right back. He went right back to sleep and I gathered our things and took me and my daughter to the train station. She asked where we were going and I told her we were going to see our other family. When we got on the train, my daughter went to sleep and I cried because of all the pain I was put through with my husband. I left and I wasn't able to say goodbye to my mother, father, or any of my younger sisters. I didn't want any of them to know because I knew they were going to try to send me back. And leaving was the best decision that I made of my life. It's now been 23 years and I found my now husband and we're living a better life. And I bless God for allowing me to make.
Story time about when my crazy celeb ex made me take a drug test because he thought I was cheating on him and stealing his drugs. Most of you already know who I'm talking about, but if you don't, he's on TV right now. Leave your guesses in the comments. At this point, we had been together about 6 months, but every time we would break up, one of us would go back. It was a very toxic cycle, but I was definitely ready to leave him at this point. I was just scared and I didn't know how to do it. He had this thing about his closet where he never left the door open and I could never go in. And he would specifically tell me not to go into his closet. He even carried his closet keys or hid them when I was around. Well, this one time I'm just chilling at his house and he comes up to me and he says, "Why did you open my safe?" And I said, "I can't even get into your closet where the safe is because I don't have keys. How would I be able to get into your safe without the combination?" Then he takes me into the closet, opens the safe, and shows me what's in there. And it's a bunch of illegal stuff that I really didn't know was there. Of course, I started to get really nervous and scared. And he accused me of stealing money and drugs and giving it to my pimp because he had a theory that I was an escort or a prostitute. Then he said he couldn't trust me any longer and took me to CVS to get a drug test. Come back for part 2. Part 2. So he takes me to CVS, and on the way there, he's yelling and telling me that if I don't pass this test, we're totally through. I told him that I would pass the test for sure, but that we were through anyway. He said he was convinced that I was a drug addict and that he needed to get away from me. Mind you, he's the one with the closet full of drugs. We get to CVS, I'm bawling my eyes out and my hands and knees are trembling. As we're entering the CVS, this man comes up to us, out of nowhere, like an angel. And he says to me, "Are you okay? Do you need some water?" And then he looks at my ex and he's like, "Hey, maybe you guys need to, sit down and talk things through." Of course, my ex answered for me and he said, "No, she's fine, don't worry." I must have looked like I needed help. The man kept close and stood at the register the whole time, kind of watching us. We got the drug test and then he rushed me back to the car. We drive back in silence to his house. And the whole time I'm just thinking, I don't need this, just leave him. I pee on the stick and then I give it back to him. He starts crying and saying that it's over because he knows it's going to come back positive. I got my things in line. A few days later, he comes to my apartment and he's really angry. Come back for part 3. Part 3, knocks on my door, I open, and the look on his face is just of pure anger. He throws the drug test results on the couch and says, "How did you pass?" And I said, "I don't do drugs." He watched me pee, you guys. He watched me pee on that stick. He said I must have taken something and there was no way I could pass the test. Then I just started yelling at him and I told him to get out. You guys, he was shocked. I had never kicked him out of my apartment before. He was shocked. Then he started crying and he said, "I can't believe you're kicking me out of your apartment." And I told him, "You made me go to CVS, take a drug test, I passed the test and you're still mad? You're never going to trust me and this isn't going to work." He said, "Of course we can work on it. You just have to stop lying to me." After I kicked him out, I felt relief. I thought it could really be over. A few days later, he calls me apologizing and crying, begging me to go back. When you're in love and you start seeing red flags, you just will do anything to ignore them. I did. Don't do the same thing.